got a hard question. I'm gonna start with self. I think that's just the first question.
All right, everyone, welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening. We're very excited to have you on this balmy Friday evening. You know, we're gonna have a cold snap again soon, but let's enjoy it while we can, right? Welcome to Lost City Books. If you're brand new here, I'll tell you a little bit about us. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore. So as you get a chance to browse around, you'll see that we've really carefully curated and selected with care all of the books, most of the books in the store. So just a few things to break down before we get started. I just realized I'm standing right in front of this camera, sorry. For the sake of this event, please silence your cell phones, and I mean all the way silent because those vibrates can really carry in a quiet room. At the end of this event, we'll have some time for a Q&A session, so please hold your questions and comments until that Q&A session. And that goes for you friendly people viewing at home. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the event. In that light, if you do have a question, your voice will be on the live stream, but you will not be visible in case you were worried about that. A few more things. Whatever my little checklist here. Yeah, just remember please to keep your masks on for the duration of our event. Our speakers are able to take theirs off while they're up here because we want to see their beautiful faces. But for everyone's safety and comfort, please keep your mask on. Lastly, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome Andrew Bertaina and Andrew Gretes to discuss One Person Away from You.
Okay, first off, thank you for hosting here. I really appreciate it. That's really lovely. So I want to say thank you for that. I think the first question, well, Andrew, do you want to give me one? You can.
Yeah, I was just gonna start asking a couple of questions, forcing Andrew to do a little bit of thinking here. So I wrote down some questions, and you can throw questions my direction as well, maybe through a spitball or something like that if you want to. But this is the first one I wrote down. One of the things you write and explore really well in your collection is yearning. I think of yearning as like a poetic desire or desire that got a BA in philosophy. Beyond yearning and a desire for connection, what other themes do you see yourself exploring in your collection, and what draws or fascinates you about these themes?
Yeah, I think beyond yearning,
that's the title, by the way. Next one.
Yeah, I think time comes up in a number of the stories and the way we negotiate it. So obviously, a lot of my stories have characters who either are outside of time or travel through time, and then I think nostalgia, which is sort of related to the yearning, but a kind of desire to get back to a previous time in life, or sometimes even get to a place that you haven't been to. And then I would say honestly the big stuff. Existential dread, religion, things like that are always going to come up. I think in my stories. Yeah.
If you're not doing well, this collection is for you.
The first person who read it, I was told it was a little too sad. So
All right, this is going to be the harder question I thought of. I wanted to stump Andrew with something, make him think again. All right, so I wrote down apparently the next question might be a bit more philosophical about storytelling itself. So I've been thinking recently about why we tell stories in the first place, which might give you an insight into my doubt-drenched soul. I was thinking there's at least two functions that stories perform. On the one hand, stories help us to understand the world. Stories can snap things into place and give us an emotional bowel movement until we finally come to grips with an emotion of some fragment of our life and that felt undigested or unresolved. On the other hand, stories can also help us to understand an idea or an element of existence. In other words, stories can help us to loosen our grip on reality so we can begin to recover the questions behind the answers, the awe behind our standard pedestrian meanings. So my question for you is, do you feel like the stories in this collection wrestle with this double purpose of storytelling? Are there stories in this collection that are more about understanding and trying to get clarity about the world? And are there stories that do the opposite and are more concerned with un-understanding the world, turning solutions into riddles?
I mean, first off, everyone that stories are just pretty confused about life. But I think, I know you asked me about my collection, and that makes sense. I'm thinking about like I always say like the human need to tell stories is like it's like hardwired in us, right? I mean, it's like as soon as we have like walls, we're cave painting on them, right? Like we love to tell stories, and there's something innate about that. So there's clearly something that I think I have, and I'm sure most people have, which is like some desire to tell a story in order to understand that kind of like first question of like, what are the emotional truths in my life? Have I missed them? What are they? And I think that like a lot of the stories are kind of dealing with that. And then there are some stories in here that deal with some more surreal elements. And I think in a way, they may be doing the kind of latter part of kind of like unlearning that kind of storytelling mechanism. But I would say that like some of the stories begin literally with somebody telling a story, right? Like in the story itself. So I do think that mechanism often clicks on in my stories. And again, that's just the way I think of like every time I think I'm like, well, this is the thing that humans like to do. So it is interesting to think about like, well, why? What are we up to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there an example in the collection you think of a story that is trying to unlearn something or at all? I mean, is there or even try to get clarity about something?
I think the story, one of the stories I'm going to read, being in time, plays with this idea of a narrator who exists outside of time and is in a relationship with somebody who is inside of it. And I think, this concept of time, like I said, just really interests me. And in that, it's trying to come to clarity of understanding a person who is, so different than you. And by playing with like a supernatural element, is to kind of like able to get at that in a way that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Okay. Yeah. It's a lot of chutzpah to come up with a story titled Being in Time. There might be a famous book called Being in Time. Okay. Third one's a little easier, I think. Okay, so let me get back to a more normal question. So in your collection, you do a great job of alternating between more traditionally linked short stories and more micro or flash fiction. Do you approach these two genres differently at all? And if so, when do you feel like a story would work better as a flash piece or more of a traditionally linked short story? And if there's an aspiring writer out there tonight, I'm sure there is, do you have any advice for ways to approach these two different like story genres?
Yeah, I mean, when you're writing flash fiction, which I largely wrote because I started to have children who are now older. Hi guys, wherever you are in the back. Because you have a smaller form, and you can actually practice writing a story over and over again, hitting those emotional beats, working at a line level, particularly working at a line level as a writer in flash fiction. And you can hit one moment, or you can even write towards an emotion. But I think it gives you a lot of work at the line level, which I love about flash fiction. It's just a shorter form. You get to practice time and time again. And then when you're working in a longer form, it's just, it's a bigger commitment of time. And you start to realize like, oh, this actually needs another beat, right? This needs something. It's like, I'll finish something and I'll think, oh, actually, it needs another character. It needs something, it needs something to happen. And that doesn't happen so much in Flash. Usually in Flash, you can kind of get away with one thing. And again, I think there's a lot to learn by continuing like, okay, I'm ending a story, and I'm ending 20 because I'm writing 20 Flash pieces. You can kind of like hit that emotional beat you're going to hit in a longer story, and you know how to do it because you practiced it.
Yeah, if you're interested in Flash, I mean, this collection, Andrew writes Flash really, really well. So again, if you're interested in that form, definitely check out this collection right here. Let me do one more, maybe before the read.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, let's go with a more personal question here. What do you feel like writing has taught you about yourself or about life in general? You've devoted yourself to this crazy craft that is fiction writing. Has the craft of being a writer changed how you see and interface with the world and how you see and interface with yourself?
That is a good question. Has it? I know I'm trying to think of when did I start? What was the impulse? What was the impulse to begin writing? I think it's like over intellectualizing the world. And if you're already doing that, you might as well put it down on a page, right? Right. And eventually, if you start to do it for a while, the best writing is going to get you to discoveries about either, yourself, particularly in the past, because my collection deals with nostalgia. I think you can learn to like understand yourself by applying these different lenses and moving through time. And I think it's definitely the case for me. I think it's definitely helped me to sort out things, relationships, having kids. A lot of these bigger things do get sorted out actually by writing. It just causes you to reflect. And like I said, I think it's a good impulse for because of course I teach college, so there's always that impulse to intellectualize. And I think it's a way of getting away from it in a creative space. It's really useful. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, okay, without further ado, we'll have Andrew read some of his stories here.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. I am going to read from the story called Being in Time first, and then I'll read a second story. So as I said, this story that takes place is narrated from the perspective of a being or an angel who's there kind of from the beginning of time. Okay. The differences between God and humans are as manifold as humans' wickedness. One can make a cup of his hand and swing it through the dark ink of the sky as if it were water, disturbing the constellations, scattering Ursa Major, or pulling comets by their tails across the Milky Way. The other can only gaze up at the stars on a clear night and ponder in that silence all the space between things, the way that stars sometimes brighten and then go dark. There are so many differences that I could write for as long as the universe spins out galaxies, the variety of O's, omnipotent, omniscient, etc. But the difference that's relevant to my own story is that God lives outside of time, flashing in and out of it like a sun-warmed bather by the pool. Man, bound by time, is forever entangled in the world, in petty jealousies, toenail clippings, erecting of shelter, the raising and shearing of sheep, the finding and losing of a wife or husband, connecting the wires on a television, yelling at a neighbor, burning a dinner of salmon and rice, vaguely noting a distant war, smoking a cigarette on the porch while the wind blows softly through the trees emulating the ocean. God is capable of constructing universe. Man can only create small things, a statue, a blueberry pie, an essay, a kitchen garden, a parking ticket, meager offerings in the face of the cosmos. In the early days, not every rule had been carved into stone tablets, which meant that some of us, who weren't quite defined, lived outside of time. God hadn't thought through the logistics of everything yet. God was always more of a brass tacks kind of person. We spent a great deal of time, which is oxymoronic, playing chess. Chess can be interminably boring. However, unmoored from time, the game became a wonder. Once, while considering a move for one of my knights, I paused and looked at the dust motes floating over my water and then took a drink. When I looked beyond the board to the world, I saw that dinosaurs were now extinct. The continent had broken free from its shelf and small animals were scurrying between caves. I looked at my opponent, but he hadn't noticed a thing, engrossed as he was in Alkine's gun. God was, for all intents and purposes, a dismal chess player. I realized that my description of God and time doesn't really make sense to a person in your present state, situated in time, reading on a couch, a computer warm in your lap, or scrolling on a phone, or watching a movie, or standing at the sink, gazing dully at the dishes, or at least I'm not very good at it. Describing it to you accurately would be akin to teaching your dog to read from the Vulgate in perfect Latin. Dogs are notoriously dismal at Latin. During those later days, if later is what they were, when we'd stopped playing chess, we'd watch people moving through the world out of what would now be called Africa and into the great unknown, though we had a pretty good idea of the geography. Perspective is everything, and we could already see that they'd eventually cover the earth. Down below, the people moved as quickly as a shaft of light through stained glass. And yet, at some moments, we would sit and contemplate every pore on someone's skin, a birthmark on their right elbow in the shape of the Adriatic, a crow's foot, the slight fold of skin on their knuckles as they reached towards a pear, breaking a small spider's web with their left forefinger. But the watching began to change the way I related to people below, who before had been abstractions, like shadows thrown upon a wall. Now I could see a bit of what he saw in them, their fragility, the way their bones broke, and the way they cried so often when they were alone. Such tenderness, such love. We didn't have the equivalent, nothing of the feeling of loss that accompanied their lives. None of us had ever stood in the backyard and buried our new child. There were no children among us, we people of the sky. I could see the piercing beauty of sheaths of corn blowing in a steady wind, the sky overhead electric blue. I believe this time of close observation is what led me into disaster, if knowing an ephemeral thing is a disaster, and I now believe it to be. How much easier it is to love the divine, the unchanged and unchangeable. Humans wriggle around like snakes. I don't remember the precise year that I fell in love. The women were wearing short skirts then and dainty shoes. The woman I fell in love with, a whip-smart divorcee of 32, was eating frozen blueberries on a blanket by the river, watching the underside of leaves reflecting geometries of light. I don't know if she was thinking then of her children or her ex-husband, or nothing at all, but I could see in the pensive look, the slight mark between her eyebrows, something in need of love. Or perhaps it was that I was in need of love, run dry like a desert culvert after all those years in the sky. I tucked my terrible wings inside a suit coat and started talking fast about tax law and my dreams of the sky, of the songs of certain birds and the color of the top of rainbows. It took me a while to get the hang of how to talk to someone ensconced in time, mired in the muck of day-to-day life. In the beginning, we talked often of our hopes and dreams, which centered on the dividends from her 401k and the ability of her children to get scholarships to four-year colleges, or maybe spend a year or two at the local junior college and then transfer elsewhere. It concerned her that I didn't have a job, and she pestered me frequently about my working resume and the long gap between employments. Those were Harlequin days, just after we'd met, when I tethered myself to her and felt as if I finally existed as a part of time. It felt as though this time could last forever. I found everything she did enchanting, the way she sometimes spit water when she laughed, her small vanities, her inability to cook a roast without burning it, her love of roses. Our happiness could not, as I'm sure you've already guessed, last. We had a logistical problem, which was the fundamentally different way that we experienced time. Sometimes she'd ask me to meet her at the Italian restaurant on Thursday night at 7 p.m., and I'd want to oblige her. And yet, as soon as I left her, I'd lose track of things and end up arriving days early or late. And I'd show up at the restaurant and listen to the songbirds in the trees or the pawing of the rain on the rooftop, growing angry at her until I checked my phone and figured out it was I who'd made the mistake. And so when we finally did meet, we'd haggle over minor things, like whether we wanted duck confit or the braised veal, each of us assuming the other was, in some way, choosing the dish, not out of desire for it, but as a means of punishing the other. Our further undoing was that our relationship coincided with Gabriel reminding us of the good old days before we had humans to watch, when we played chess. And I felt within myself a quiet stirring, like wind upon a room full of dust, a longing for the game when we'd yell, "Rook 8 to pawn 2. We were inveterate jokesters when it came to chess and meant nothing by our yelling, as we barely understood the pieces, which sometimes disintegrated in the long stretch of time between our moves, until we wound up moving bits of dust with our fingernails across the oak board, breathing softly, quietly, in an attempt to not lose everything. Unfortunately, now engrossed in these games, I sometimes wouldn't check on her for a week or two, and when I finally did, she pointed out that my absence made her feel vulnerable and self-conscious, and reminded her of her ex-husband, who was a bit of a layabout. And didn't I know she had kids? She counted on me to show up because she had to arrange babysitters for these nights out and lay out explicit directions for how and when to serve meals, all at the end of a long week that had already left her feeling ragged and in need of a good scream. And then I didn't show up. It made her question what she was up to, working long hours, making sure the children had vegetables with every meal, were clean and well adjusted, if only to carve out 2 hours in her life to meet with someone who didn't give a damn about her. That she was right was insufficient. I could not tie myself to her or the children. Such a thing was not allowed. We spent a day, I remember, in the Green Mountains of Vermont. We walked through a field where the bluebells, clover, and dandelions covered the hillside like a quilt. The sky suddenly darkened, voluminous clouds appeared, and we hid beneath the eaves of a large pine while hailstones fell around us like the wrath of God. Later, the sun appeared, and we finished our hike to a waterfall. We read passages to one another from Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises while sitting on a blanket, the spray of the fall nearly reaching our faces, falling down on the rocks, creating rainbows in the air. A pair of black swifts harvested insects, dark blurs against the pale bruise of the sky. She lay back in my arms, her hair smelled of apples. She said that she wished the moment could last forever, and I became aware suddenly of time washing over me, filling me, every crevice in my nose and eyes, time pouring out of me like sand from a glass. And I saw that time could consume me, or I thought I did, for suddenly that afternoon flowed away like leaves in autumn wind, Her children grew up and left her, and I disappeared for a decade by accident, and she was soon dead. Perhaps I understood nothing. Here is what she could have meant by time. Time is something that you can scoop into your hands, like God with a sky full of stars, or a child with fine grains of sand. Time is like a shark, either moving or dead. Time is the soft feeling on the inside of her palm, my finger running along a spidery blue vein, tracing it back toward the heart along a hand suddenly covered in wrinkles. Time is that which does not stop. Long after the stars have stopped their idle burning and turned to dust, I'll be sitting in an ever-darkening room, watching time lap at the window like water on a shore. In the mornings, I'll think of her, the crow's feet on her eyes, the steel gray of her hair, her slender fingers, this woman, dead now for a week, a day, or a millennium. I was just telling God the other day that I don't understand time, and God pointed out that when it came to brass tacks, I don't really understand much of anything. God said that time was like a mustard seed, like birds of the field, and then God trailed off and looked for a long time at the universe in a deep well of silence. Perhaps it's blasphemy to say it, but I hope when the universe is ripped to shreds that I go with it. God and I are playing chess. We're using stars as pawns, moons as rooks, planets as knights, suns as bishops, and galaxies as kings and queens. Sometimes I look away in my reverie, and I swear that God has moved another piece across the vast black space of sky, cheating once again while I ponder my next move. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that story. I thought maybe we'd do a question about that just because since he just read it. But yeah, I feel like you do a really wonderful job with the magical and like the speculative elements of being in time. I thought, just to ask you, like, what are some of your favorite magical realists or speculative, fabulous writers? And then, how have these writers influence you? And then secondly, what are some like cheat codes or writing hacks for anyone who wants to write fabulous fiction as well as you?
The best advice is just to read like all of Borges, because you just get this like window into somebody who's just constantly working in these like fantastic realms. But then there's Kelly Link, Rhiannon Lucar-Scott has a new collection that has good elements of it. George Saunders, sort of adjacent to it. All of those writers, I think, do interesting things. Samantha Schweblin is like an Argentinian writer who's doing interesting things that are kind of like horror. I think Borges is the one who sort of like, and Calvino were sort of the ones who at least pointed me towards like the possibilities of it. And I read like 500 pages of Borges and the 500 pages was nonfiction. And I was like, okay, I think I get it. Takes 1,000 pages.
What's like, if someone wants to write fabulous stories, putting an angel into a story is a difficult thing without having Nicolas Cage and City of Angels. You don't want that maybe. So if you're going to do that, like how do you do it? I mean, how do you pull it off?
From a writing perspective, I think you just have to enter the world right away and like not try to explain it at all. It just is, right? I mean, like if you start off with it, I can't remember the name of the writer. I'm just reading a story that did this in like the first line, the doctor removes his wife's head or something like that. And it's just a given in a part of the story. And then you kind of like move on from there. And of course he's crazy and it becomes speculative and she comes back alive. But I think it's really just like starting in it as opposed to like the impulse sometimes is to be like, let me describe for you this really interesting thing. And it's actually just kind of like in a way, like believe in it yourself and just tilt the world a little bit. And your reader trusts it. Yeah. But I tend to do it early. Yeah. At least in shorter stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Deadpan, I guess. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. It is deadpan. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I think you're gonna read your second story.
Okay.
I interrupted you.
So this story, courtesy of Cosmopolitan 24 Big Bang Sex Tips, is based on Cosmopolitan, believe it or not, and just being in the checkout line with my mother and like wondering how there were always sex tips, right? Like there has to be a limit, like or an end point to sex tips, but they were always there. So I decided to write a story that was, my version of it. Number one, when wearing a tweed cardigan, he asks after your afternoon, tell him of your love of Foucault. Talk about the nature of power and its role in structuring society and relationship. Use words like patriarchy, maleficent, discipline, and punish. Like most men, you will find this irresistible, and you're likely in for a wonderful afternoon of tepid sex, followed by a quick shower. Number 2, buy a blow-up doll off the internet. When he's out posing with the doll in scenes reminiscent of a Rockwell painting, post these pictures on Instagram. The doll should be middle-aged and mustachioed, and he's going to look best in themed outfits, baseball player, ship captain, dancer, etc. Above all, always keep the doll hidden when your partner is around. Finally, after weeks, take the doll with 2 of you on a picnic, reenacting a pointillist painting with pink umbrellas, watery light, and a vague turquoise river running past you. If your partner is jealous, point out that he's jealous of an inanimate object. When he goes to sleep, pack your bags and fly to Vegas with the doll and take pictures of your wedding, after which you may have tepid sex. Number 3, keep things sexy by surprising him after a shower wearing all your clothes. Dig through the closet and into winter clothes, putting on sweatpants and shirts that say things like JV track on them. After seeing you, he'll be surprised and will probably want to talk about what kind of times you recorded in the 400 meters. Number 4, stand over him in the middle of the night, watching his chest rise and fall. If he wakes, startled, and asks what you're doing, tell him you've been thinking about your 401k. Ask him if he thinks, in all honesty, if you're vested enough to retire at 57. Wake him periodically to help you with the math calculations. Like most men, he will find this irresistible. Number 5, put on a pair of really baggy pajamas and demand to watch Netflix and eat Ben & Jerry's ice cream. If he says, tonight I just want to watch sports, remind him that only one of you loves sports, but both of you love to eat ice cream. It is so cold, so rich and sweet. Number 6, take up the art of origami. Fold him a swan or whatever people are folding these days. Tell him the swan or whatever you happen to fold is a paper packed with meaning. If he asks, why did you make me a swan? Say, all life is an act of interpretation. Number 7, read Tolstoy's War and Peace and talk to him extensively about the decisions the characters are making, the possible impact on their lives and future happiness. Act as if they are real people sitting in the next room, waiting for their lives to unfold like pages in a book while the tea steeps in the kitchen, leftover steam dissolving in the half-light creeping through white curtains. Number 8, learn a foreign language. When your mother calls, use your new foreign language skills to speak in a tone that conveys complaint. Eye him significantly during the conversation and frequently shake your head in disgust. Remember, everything sounds like an argument in Italian. If he asks, say something in French, which will remind him of the bedroom because of all the episodes of Red Shoe Diaries he watched as a teenager, in which French maids figured prominently. Number 9, find a job that you are deeply passionate about. Prioritize the work. Speak of it as something that helps you find meaning. Talk of your job often, taking brief breaks to reflect on what it means to make a difference in the world. Like many men, he will want to take up your passions and also sometimes have slow, sweet lovemaking sessions. Number 10, make him a mixtape of your top all-time favorite songs from Celine Dion. When the one from Titanic comes on, move closer, fold your fingers into his and say, it's okay to cry, while making the sort of eye contact that conveys deep sympathy, deep understanding. Crying is an aphrodisiac for most men, especially when they are the ones crying. If this fails, feel free to try Adele. Number 11, after his body has warmed the sheets, find a cool pocket for your cheek to rest on and tell him about a morning from your childhood. Do not leave out any of the details. He wants to hear about the ducks, the rust-colored leaves, the musty scent of that autumn morning, the wind brushing away the drops of dew. Number 12, sigh deeply and meaningfully when he comes to bed. If he asks what you were thinking, roll away and say, nothing. Then sigh again. Repeat this cycle until the repetition has washed over you completely and you are actually thinking of nothing. There are no dishes to be washed, no floors to be cleaned, no bills to be paid, no bosses asking for your progress on reports about Yemen. Let yourself fall into the moment slowly like a snowflake from some very distant cloud. Feel the immensity of the quiet. Number 13, take up bird calls. As you are getting into bed, quiet him with a finger over his lips and repeat the slight hoo of a barred owl. If he tries to speak, say, shh. Now is the time to walk to the window, to feel glass cool against your fingertips. Say, if we are completely silent, we might hear him. Call quickly, quietly again. And again, the harsh net of the screen scratching against your face. Are you out there? Are you out there? When the owl doesn't respond, get back in bed and lie quietly. Do not begin sobbing. Everyone is alone. Number 14, take up sailing on the weekends. Take the boat out over the water just after sunrise when the light is green and the sea calm. Become an expert on sailing, listening intently to the lonesome cry of gulls skimming along the water as if they are harvesting morning light. Speak frequently of your love of the movie Double Jeopardy, in which Ashley Judd is framed for murdering her spouse on a sailboat. If he asks what the plot points are, sit down with him and watch it. After the movie is over, discuss life insurance policies, saying that he's worth at least $2 million to you. Offer to take him sailing every weekend until he agrees. When you are finally out on the open water again, he'll take off his shoes and ask where you're sailing to, with a small grin creeping across his face. Hand him a cup of champagne that is drugged. As he slumps down against the siding, enjoy the quiet, the brine, and the slight breeze. Sailing was your thing. For a moment, you almost fucked that up. Number 15, become a budding astrologist and deliver platitudes every time he walks in the door. Be open to things, stay focused. Today, someone you love might be in need of you. Someone you love may shut you out. Be watchful, be attentive. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Be mindful, be. Eventually admit that it's trash, but everything in life is trash. Everything is just making things up until the day we die. Number 16, when the attractive waiter returns to the table to collect his tip, he will find bits of a poem scrawled on a napkin. Something by Mary Oliver about the geese, the pebbles of rain, and the clear blue sky. 17, if you find yourself in need, talk to your lover about the philosopher David Hume. Tell your lover the truth, that despite all appearances to the contrary, there really is no guarantee that the sun will rise in the morning. Let your bodies unfold in the eternity of the moment. Then flip on the television and watch an episode of BoJack Horseman that reminds you of despair, of cold gray winter days, of afternoons underneath a blanket that turns into quiet lovemaking and long naps. Number 18, draw him a detailed picture of the people you love, not forgetting a single detail, but falling short just the same. Nothing in life is ever as easy as it seems. In the evening, describe to him what each line and a bit of shading on the page represents to you. Tell him what it means to you to have tried to capture something ineffable. An afternoon with your father on the lake when you were 7, his gray hair, his small quick hands on the fishing line, or an evening spent with your mother when you were 15, or the precise tenor of light coming from a lamp as the two of you laughed and began to love one another again, as you had when you were a child. All your memories are like this, flickers of television shows that you watched in the 90s. Number 19, tell him about your passions, the sorts of questions that keep you awake at night, lying in the darkness while the world spins and spins, and your mind tries to keep up with the awful pace. 20, sleep, at all costs sleep. When you wake, the world will once again be full of wonder. 21, draw an elaborate map that has a pathway to your heart. Include everything that you've loved since you were very little. A kitten named Speckles, Gem and the Holograms, a math quiz that you got 100% on in 3rd grade. Make the map like a maze with entry points but no exit. This is the way, if I'm being honest, to have Big Bang type sex. Number 22, read him a poem or a piece of literature that moves you deeply. After, sit in the quiet of the room and think together, sinking into the moment like a body into water. The universe is a solitary space, and all its creatures do nothing but reinforce its solitude. In it, I have never met anyone. I have only stumbled across ghosts. E.M. Ciorian. Number 23, there are hours composed of uncertainty. The eye of the morning is not the same as the eye of the evening. I am perhaps immortal as long as I am I, though one day the eye will be extinguished, at which point I will no longer be immortal. You and I are both abstractions, paintings hung on the wall of some very dark cathedral in a land far away where no one can speak our names. This is merely a longish way of saying, as some people are prone to, in all things, if possible, be kind. Number 24, come summer, board a plane and fly to somewhere in the east. If you can afford it, unmoor yourself even from the dock of language. Float through the serpentine streets, ducking into cafes for cafe au lait, or slip into the church to beat the heat of the day. Sweat dripping from your nose, and amidst the dark and cool stone, admire a fresco of Christ's Passion or Mary's Lament by an artist whose name you don't know. And yet there you are, face now tight with dried sweat, encountering their name on a wall 500 years after they have died. Keep a journal throughout the trip and write briefly about the activities of each day, but spend the majority of the journal reflecting on how everything makes you feel, your impressions, your thoughts, the way that you connected to the fresco and the dead painter's name on the wall. When you return home, if he asks after the trip, the sunlight skimming through the windows, tell him that it is your own private journey, which you will talk about in due time. Say that if he sticks around for months or years, perhaps you can begin to deliver bits and pieces of this trip, like glass washing up on the shore of some distant sea. In this way, we might achieve something like sex or perhaps love. What's that?
Like now I know how to seduce a man. Thank you. Finally. Wow, that was really good. I feel like you hit so many notes in that story. I mean, when you reread it, you're just playing the whole friggin' scale. Is there a note you've ever wanted to hit that you haven't hit as a writer? I'm just kind of curious. Are there notes you try to hit?
I was just having a conversation about this. Sorry. Yeah, I was just having a conversation about this. I would like to be funny, but like also like sad and then emotional, which like maybe you'd say, yeah, you hit all the notes, but like I'd like to do it without having to have the little like caesures, like without the pauses, but be able to like have it all like fit together in a story. And I feel like I'm still like learning how to do it. You know, it's just like it's hard to like try to hit all the notes without losing, you know, overdoing it with one of them.
I mean, I think that one does, but yeah. Here's a different question, kind of about that story. Obviously, you know, the piece is written with second person, you know, female audience in mind, and throughout the collection, you do a great job of writing from female vantage points. What's your secret, and how do you approach perspective in general? Are there strategies or trade secrets you have for trying to embody and approximate the vantage point of various protagonists in your collection?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one with the females was just being really close to my mother and my sister growing up. So it was just like, it doesn't even seem like strange to me that would be the first kind of voice that would appear to me. It's like I wasn't close to my dad, I wasn't close to my brother, I was close to my mom and my sister. So it's just like, it's like when I hear a voice, I mean, the very first story I wrote was like from a female perspective. And it just, again, those are the people I was always talking to about the sorts of things that we talk about in literature. But I do generally just go with like voice. And I think that like I also do avoid specifics though, because obviously I don't know aspects about the female experience. So like what I try to inhabit is a feeling like loneliness or something like that. So these more universals. Obviously I've talked to my mother and sister, but you know, there are things that I'm also aware of not knowing. So I tend to go for more universal kind of like emotions in those stories.
Yeah. Is there a question you've always wanted to be asked, but you were never asked?
No.
All right. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of risk taking in the collection. I mean, the fact again, you wrote from an angel's perspective, where you did like a Cosmo joke that's actually really profound, and there's a lot of poetry in that. You have poetry even in the collection. I feel like the last piece is a bit of prose poetry. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is like, what do you feel like is the most risk taking you take in the collection? And then secondly, what do you advise? Again, I'm just imagining there's a budding writer here. What do you imagine? You know, what do you suggest for people who want to like take risks in fiction?
Yeah, the riskiest story. I mean, I think like to me, those feel like the stories that didn't come as easily. Like I'm a believer somewhat in the muse. Like some stories just come to me, and I'm like, that's easy. It's like when a story doesn't come to me, and I decide to revisit it several times. In a way, like those stories feel like bigger risks because I'm like, that didn't work. Like what are the engines that make a story go, and how can I put them in this story and have it, you know, still come off? So there's a story, The Space Between Us, that I wrote, and it was in graduate school, and I finished it. I was like, that story is crappy, and I turned it into a workshop, and I was like, it's a crappy story. And I was like, how do I engineer the story that I don't like at all into something that I can be like proud of? There's just like a lot of work. It was a lot of research about, you know, it's set in Italy, and just thinking through that. In addition to like the character's emotions, but in a way, it's like taking something and making it work. It feels like a bigger risk. Sometimes something just works the first time out. But I would say just work. I mean, I just like I tell students when I'm teaching, I'm like, I write stories over and over and over. You know, it's like I'll rewrite every single line until like the line sounds right to me. And that's like kind of my, you know, my only method is like it's hard work. But then, you know, you also have to get used to it and be like, yeah, how are the gears of the story working? Do I need some other element in here? And I think you only get there through practice, reading a lot and writing a lot yourself. Yeah, I wish there was a shortcut. But yeah.
I was hoping you would provide.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll open it up for other people then, right? Questions for Andrew over here? I can throw the microphone in your direction, or you can scream, everyone.
I have a follow-up question based on what you just said. So you said that some feels like a bigger risk when you have to figure out like what's not working. Just as a writer, like what do you experience as more rewarding? Like when it just kind of comes to you, or when you really have to work at it?
The first one, I like it. I like it when it just comes to me, and I like it when it gets accepted early at a literary journal. Like, like I like everything to be easy because so much of writing is hard. So I really appreciate it when it's not. But I suppose there's the only way to get writing done is to do it when it's not working, because that's the majority of the time. Yeah. But no, I'm gonna like for it to be easy.
I feel like dissatisfaction is one of the muses, right? I mean, it's like, you need dissatisfaction and envy, and then you're going to be good, right? Other questions? You can ask him anything too. His favorite color, anything.
Yeah. A follow-up to a follow-up. You said that writing is hard, so you like to when it comes easy. As a writer of a different type, I totally get that, and I wonder if you could quantify what amount of your writing feels like hard work and a slog versus what just comes easy to you. Because it seems easy from my perspective, like it seems like it just comes.
Right. I would say it's like, I don't know, maybe 60-40, 70-30 in terms of negative. It was like the other day, I did a writing time, and I set a timer for half an hour, and I had like 28 minutes that were just totally useless. I was like, I had a story I've been working on for like 7 years. I actually sent to him, I was like, figure this out for me. I have no idea. And then something just came to me last 3 minutes, and then I like wrote a story, and then I worked on it for 2 weeks, and I feel like it's like, close-ish to done. And that was nice, but there's a lot of thrown away time too. And like, I always think that things are going better than they are. And then I open up a document, like I said, and then I find this story that's, 20 pages long that I've written, 9 times. And I'm like, this is a good idea. Like, why isn't it working? It's inert. So I try not to remind myself of those, or, then maybe I wouldn't. So I feel like it probably tilts more in the not successful, but again, just forget about those ones.
How did you identify the unifying thread of this collection?
So it's interesting because I wrote the collection over such a long period of time. Like, it took a long time to come out. So I feel like the themes themselves just kind of like, it was sort of like tracing them myself as a writer. It's like, okay, what interested me at 25 when I wrote the first story versus like 38 when I wrote the last one. And so like when Andrew was asking those questions, I'm like, oh, it's interesting to watch yourself continue to ask those same questions of, religion, what, loneliness, like, what does it mean to feel connected to another person? And they take slightly different shapes. It's like suddenly children start appearing in my stories and things like that, right? Like, but really those questions, I think, continue to get asked in slightly, the way in which I answer them maybe changes in the way in which the question is posed, but the questions remain. Like, I grew up quite religious, and I'm not particularly religious now, but that theme, I'm going to sort of story about God, is like prevalent. Yeah.
I feel like it's like the accent mark on your stories change. It's the same question, but where you put the accent mark changes.
Yeah. And
you do that with like, I feel like they get more and more optimistic, actually. It's slightly, I mean, you're incremental optimism.
That makes me happy.
Let's not be crazy.
Yeah.
How do you come up with your titles? Because I was wondering, like, does the title ever come first? Is it like just always lines lifted? Because I feel like I can write something and then I'm just like, it can never exist because there's nothing to call this.
That's funny. I feel like, obviously we're in graduate school together, right? And they were always like, just pick a line from your story that's like really good, right? And I don't ever do that. I mean, like, I'm proud of my title. I like One Person Away from You. I'm like, that's a good title. But I'm like, when I look at the other ones, I'm like, it's just like and then like what happens in the story. And so I'm the wrong person. And I was just talking about to students, and they're writing like shorter pieces. I'm like, you have to really nail that title because it really does a lot of work for your reader. And then I'm like looking through it. I'm like, total hypocrite.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, sorry.
So a lot of your stories, you've got, emotional notes of like, some nice sadness, introspection, and of course, like humor. In order to kind of like write from that perspective, do you feel like you have to be in that mindset, or is that something you feel like you can only write from a retrospective perspective?
You know what? I do write a lot from like, I feel like I'm not always the most emotional person unless I'm like listening to music that shows up in the story or like, watching something. But I do, when I write, I often like inhabit an emotional space, and then I will get really sad and then write like a sad character. I don't write it from like a distance. I write it and feel, loneliness is something that comes easily to me in life. So like I often write lonely characters because I can conjure that feeling really easily. But I do have more success writing with the emotion actually present.
I'm here for you. Follow up, I guess, do you have any tricks for putting yourself in that mind space or headspace? Like, are you just like a method writer, or do you have that?
No, well, yes. I mean, sometimes there's certain images that like recur in my stories. And I think it's just like, if I start looking out the window and I catch a tree in the breeze, it's like, I start to get pensive, it's like a simple thing, but I can be thrown into existential dread really easily. So, just look out a window for 3 minutes and suddenly, somebody's sad in my story.
I've got a good one. So, you mentioned philosophy and you mentioned philosophers. So how do you incorporate sort of like the big ideas into your stories? Do you ever sort of feel like, oh, okay, this is existential. Let me like reference Foucault, or like, do you ever find yourself reading philosophy and then you're like getting ideas to incorporate into fiction?
I read philosophy and get confused, to be honest. But I wish that I was like a novelist. I don't know, like people who write long form, because I think you can like really get deeper into ideas. And I think I often like touch the top of them and they're there and I read about it. But yeah, I feel like, I'm probably not going to write a novel, but I wish I could, because I feel like getting deeper into some of those things would be interesting. Like, what does it look like to have a character actually embody a philosophical like framework? But I haven't really done it.
Well, but I mean, I feel like philosophy is about like defamiliarizing the world, and even that time one, right? The idea that an angel would have to experience time. Suddenly you have that great moment in the story where you break the story, you say, here's his attempt to imagine what time is, right? And which is our attempt too, to be like, what the hell is time? I mean, it's like the fish asking the question, like, what is water? Well, it only knows once it's beached, oh shit, that was water. But like, so it's the same thing for, what I just feel like you do that really well, even though it's not technically, I guess, philosophy. It is the heart of philosophy. So yeah.
Every time I try to write like an idea story, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it sounds like really didactic. And I start to think like, oh, we'll just put it in an essay. And then I tried the essay and it still sounds didactic. So I just leave it and talk to people about it, my friends. That's where that ends up. Yeah. I don't know why. I think novels are great. It's a great place to have like big ideas in novels and see them carried out and played out. I think it's great, but yeah, it's not something I feel particularly capable of. Yeah.
What was your favorite story?
Well, thank you for asking, Sadie. My favorite story is The Language of God, because it was one of those stories that didn't work at all. And I went back to it and I think I made it into something that I'm proud of. So it was hard, but I like it a lot. Thank you.
What convinced you to make the book?
What convinced me to make the book? Hefty student debt from my graduate degree. And then I was in miscalculation because they didn't give much money for a book. So,
I think it was just egoism, right?
I mean, there has to be some egoism in writing, right? You write something down and like other people should read it. Yeah.
Got time for about one more question.
When did you start writing for other people? That like your basically teacher said, "Oh, you're actually a pretty good writer."
My first creative writing class in undergrad, I got a C+ on my poetry journal. It was a C-, and I got a B+ on my story. And then I just read a bunch of great books, right? That's like that. That's how I learned to be a writer. Like, I thought I was pretty good in undergrad. But that wasn't very borne out by my grades. But yeah, I just read a lot. I just read a ton, and then I really just was like, I wonder if I can do that. And then the second story I ever wrote is like in this collection. And it's, I'm like proud of it. It's like a good story and it's weird, but I think it was just like, actually I read the list of the top 100 novels ever. I read the greats and I was like, oh my gosh, like what might this look like to attempt yourself. And I think that was my learning ground. It wasn't writing in undergrad like a lot of cohort did that. I didn't do that. I read a lot to try to figure it out. Yeah. I was an English major, but there's a low credit threshold. It wasn't like that. Which ones? 40 days. Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about 60-40, 70-30, the hard ones versus the easy ones. When you look back at this collection, does one category or the other stand out as like having the ones you feel are better? Like, or do the better ones come easier or harder, or neither?
Short form, I feel like the better ones came easier, but it's so hard to have a long story come out right the first time. So some of the longer ones that I'm proud of, were the hard work. But for short form, I think it's like those usually happen in not one sitting, and I edited a lot after, but they come out in one sitting with some of the flash stuff. I don't usually get it right if I have to rewrite it a bunch.
Was anyone helping you write the story?
Was anyone helping you write this?
I got a lot of help. I got your mother. She was in my class. She helped me. Andrew was too. Yeah, I had people give me a lot of feedback on the stories. So a lot of people do help you when you write, which is kind of a cool thing about taking this solitary activity and then sharing it with people.
Heartbreak helped you, loneliness helped you.
Yeah. I mean, life gives you a lot. Yeah, life gives you a lot. So yeah.
Can you let our audience know where they can keep up with you and find out whatever your next project is, or find you online?
You can follow me on Twitter if you don't already, and then andrewbertaina.com. I need to update, but that's where I post my writing. And I'm still writing, short stories, and hoping that it doesn't take as long for another book. But at the same time, this is really great to have, and just out there. But thank you so much for coming. Everyone who's here, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being an incredible audience. Just as a note, if you bought your book through the Eventbrite, that's going to be downstairs for you behind the front desk, so you can go and grab that. Otherwise, if you don't have your book yet, we do still have some copies left, so get them while they're hot, and maybe Andrew will deign to sign it for you if he asks very nicely.
Thank you so much.
I would love a copy and I'd really like to hear the story. Like, I'm in college at American and studying non-normative temporality and all that. Did Daniel send you over?
I just wanted to introduce myself.